Hi, this is Debbie, and today I'm going to be looking at how to create a shaped shaker card. Shaped cards are fun and shaker cards are fun too, and so I thought why not double the fun and combine the two to create a shaped shaker card. This card requires minimum supplies. I've simply got the balloon dies from Sam Says Stamp and the birthday wishes stamp set from Mama Elephant, and one of the dies from the balloons die set fits so nicely over that beautiful happy birthday scripted sentiment. I've got a piece of Nina Solar white card which is just slightly larger than the balloon die and some inks from Sam Says Stamp. Using a Ranger mini ink blending tool, I'm going to bring the inks across the card, and when it's die cut, the darkest area will be at the base of the balloon where the balloon is tied. I'm starting with Sea Glass ink, which is lovely light blue, and I'm gently bringing that in circles from the edge of the card. And by gently layering up, layer on layer on layer, you'll deepen the colour without getting any harsh blending lines. I've speeded this video up now because this process does take some time to get a nice even blend. So I'm working the Sea Glass ink from the bottom up, and then I'm going to bring in Lake Shores, which is the slightly deeper blue, and I'm going to darken the colour which will be at the base of the balloon. It is slightly more difficult not to get marks when you're working with a darker colour, but again, by keeping the layers light, you'll get the best effect. Once I'd finished blending, I then ran the card through the die cutting machine with the balloon die, and then I ran the die through again, this time with just plain white card, and this will become the back of the shaped shaker card. And because the back and the front have been cut with the same die, they will match up perfectly. I want to add some colour variation to the front of the balloon. Along with the sequins that I'm going to add later, I want it to look like the balloon is filled with confetti. I'm using the Gansey Tambi watercolours, and I've got a dilute solution of that lovely pool colour on my brush, and I'm splattering the balloon so that the splatters look like they're coming from the base of the balloon and up. I added a few darker splatters for variation again, but it was the lighter pool colour that I really liked, so I went back to that and added more splatters, really getting that splattering going from the base and up towards the top of the balloon. To finish the splatters, I like to use a dilute solution of Perfect Pearls. I add a scoop of Perfect Pearls in a Ranger Mini Mister, give it a good shake up, and then use the tube from the Mini Mister to add splatter. I've placed that to one side to dry, and now I'm going to work on the shaker aspect of the card. I'm going to need a piece of acetate to hold the sequins in, and I'm using heat resistant acetate from hot off the press. I've placed a piece of the acetate inside a Mini Misty, and I've got the sentiment from Mama Elephant on the door of the Mini Misty. I've treated the acetate with some EK Success powder tool, and this will prevent embossing powder sticking where I don't want it to, because I'm going to silver heat emboss this sentiment. I'm stamping the sentiment with Versamark ink, which is a sticky ink to which the embossing powder will adhere to, and I'm giving it a good press down to get the best impression. I can then sprinkle silver embossing powder from Sam Says Stamp all over the acetate, giving it a really good covering, and then tap off any excess. I can then clean up any stray powder with an old paintbrush. The acetate really does like things to stick to it, so it often is necessary, even despite having treated it with a powder tool, it often is necessary to just tidy up. I've got my heat tool really good and hot so that I don't have to have the heat tool against the acetate for very long, and then I'm bringing it to the embossing powder to melt it. I've been keeping the backer paper that comes with the acetate so that you can see what I've been doing, but now if I take that backer paper away, you can see how beautiful that sentiment looks. You can still see some of the powder tool which prevent the embossing powder sticking where you didn't want it to, but I'll be able to rub that off with a soft cloth later. I'm using the grid mat to make sure I've got the sentiment straight, and then I'm lining up the balloon die around it, and I'm going to keep that in place with washi tape before running it through the die cutting machine. I've now got both front pieces for the shaker card, but before I attach them together, I'm going to give the acetate a rub with a microfiber cloth to get rid of any of the last bit of powder. To attach the two together and trap some sequins in between, I'm going to turn to my grandmother's sewing machine. This passed its factory test in 1951, so it really is an antique and yet is still working perfectly. And it also brings back really fond memories of my grandmother. I've threaded the machine with some silver thread and then lined up the two balloon pieces, and I'm going to start sewing close to the edge, and I'm starting at the base of the balloon and I'm going to work my way round. When I'm 3/4 of the way round the balloon, I'm going to leave the needle in place, and yet I'm going to hutch out the balloon so that I can actually tuck some sequins inside. So the balloon very much is still attached to the sewing machine. That's keeping the thread so that when I start stitching again, I'll get a continuous line of stitching. But there's just enough space to take some sequins and sort of shuffle them in between the two layers. It is slightly fiddly as you're working with limited space, and more sequins did end up on the table than in the shaker, but eventually I managed to get enough sequins in there that I could then continue stitching around to finish trapping the sequins inside. I must admit I'm really pleased at how this turned out. It's both fun to shake and yet really pretty too. I tied off the loose sewing threads on the back and then tied a twine bow which toned with the sequins and attached that with a rolled up glue dot. Now that the front of the shaker card is complete, I need to make the back of the shaker card so that this will be able to stand up. I've laid the back piece into a scoring tool and I'm scoring a line just slightly down from the top of the balloon, and this will act as a hinge. I'm using Ranger Multi-Medium in matte and adding a layer of glue above the score line, and then I can line the front and the back pieces up and the glue will keep the two pieces together. Because the base of the balloon tie cut is rounded, this would create a rocker effect and the card would fall over, and so I'm going to cut the base of the balloon just a tiny bit off the edge so that I've got a straight edge on which the card can balance. And that completes this fun shaker card. I had great fun making it. I hope you had fun watching, and if you did, I'd be delighted if you think about subscribing to this channel. I'll leave you with some photographs. I've listed all the supplies I used down in the YouTube description below, and you'll also find details on my blog at limedoodledesign.com. I want to thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.